Promised you guys you'd get a movie review. I'm gonna be doing a movie. Hang on. There we go. Welcome back, my YouTube family. So today's movie review is going to be one that is very overdue, and it's especially overdue for this channel. Not only because I haven't done a movie review in well over 9-10 months, but primarily because this is a movie review I have been ranting and raving about to all of my friends on social media pretty much non-stop because of how much I hated this movie. Now, you can probably take a wild guess as to which movie I'm talking about. Nope. Nope. I actually kind of like that one, so no. There we go. Yeah, so the Fantastic Four movie was by and large the major failure of this summer in terms of blockbusters. And that's not really shocking to see why. My expectations of Marvel movies was actually kind of switched in terms of my preconceptions of going into the movie and then actually coming out of the movies. That being Ant-Man and Fantastic Four. Now with Ant-Man, I was actually very pessimistic about Ant-Man and didn't think it was going to be able to fly with a mainstream audience. I thought it would be too much of a stretch for people to take as a comic book movie or as a superhero movie. In reality, it was actually very similar to what Marvel's been doing lately. They sort of do these weird genre mixes of superhero and pick another subgenre of film. My example that I used for Ant-Man is that it was basically a superhero movie mixed with a heist movie. With Captain America's Winter Soldier, you had a political thriller with a superhero. And a lot of Marvel movies have been doing that lately. Guardians of the Galaxy, space opera mixed with superheroes. And it's actually made their products much more digestible and much more entertaining for a wider audience to enjoy. That you cannot say the same thing about with Fantastic Four. Now, my expectations about Fantastic Four going in were not wildly stellar. I didn't have great expectations for it, but I at least expected something better based on the trailers. So what was I expecting? I expected a darker, more gritty, realistic version of the Fantastic Four story. One that would potentially tie in much better with the X-Men universe and where that particular story has gone and where it will go with X-Men Apocalypse. That is not what we got. You have Reed Richards as a child who is very brilliant and is has a genius mind, but is a bit Aspergery, which I've noticed a lot with a lot of storytelling these days. Whenever they have someone who's incredibly brilliant, they basically give him either some form of autism or some form of social anxiety in order to sort of combat the genius quality so he's not too perfect. So he and Ben Grimm are friends from a young age. Ben would allow Reed to use parts from his family's scrap heap in order to build particular machines that he was interested in building, and eventually resulting in a dimensional teleportation machine. Now what this machine basically is it can teleport living organic matter to another dimension or what they think is a teleportation machine in the initial beginning. And then Dr. Storm comes in with Sue Storm saying, oh no, it's not teleportation because it's not on planet Earth. The material belongs to something alien. So we basically go on this whole lovely ride of going through everyone's backstory. We find out that Sue is the adopted child of Dr. Storm. Johnny has a bit of a thrilling lifestyle, is a bit of an adrenaline junkie, which makes sense with the personality that's set up in the comic books. Likes to drag race and gets into many accidents and is basically really smart and is seen as wasting his potential, which I think is a really good way to set up Johnny Storm. They also work with Von Doom. They basically have this entire scientific team that allows people to interdimensionally travel. So they spend a good chunk of the movie basically working on it, building those kind of character moments. If there's one thing I have to say about the Fantastic Four movie is that the first half of it is a really good setup. The characters are engaging. I really like the way that the characters are acted and portrayed. And you actually feel like you understand their backstory, you understand who they are as people, and nothing really kind of seems out of the ordinary. Even up until the moment when they actually do the interdimensional travel and, you know, they're all kind of acting like asshats. Now, so for the big accident, you know, the thing that causes them all to get their powers, they basically have this bro talk after they've been able to prove that they can send life to another dimension. They just sent a chimp and it brought back and it was perfectly fine, and so they're like, okay, we need to now start sending humans, and the evil government basically says we need to send NASA because they're the trained professionals. the team of Reed, Von Doom, and Johnny Storm basically get drunk one night and they're like, why would we let other people take our credit and take our name away from this miraculous moment, from this moment in history? Sort of the same way that you would look at the moon landing. Like, you remember the people who actually went to the moon. You don't really necessarily remember the people who built the rockets or sent them to the moon. So that's what their mentality is for why they want to go and do the interdimensional travel first. Of course, they're doing it in a drunken stupor, and it's really stupid, but they're young and they're men, and they're, of course, going to do silly, stupid things. What ends up happening is Reed sort of calls Ben in the middle of the night saying, hey, we're doing this. You and I started doing this when we were kids. I'm not doing this without you, and you need to get your butt down here. It is essentially because of Reed that Ben turns into what he turns into, which we all know is the Thing. And there's a lot of deserved resentment there, but I'll talk about that a little bit more later. They do the travel, they start exploring it, and then eventually this energy kind of swallows them up and they start running back to the teleportation machine. And basically what ends up happening is Von Doom is then trapped in that dimension. We don't really have a context of where that dimension is or what its place is in this universe. They don't really have an established context for it yet, so we're still kind of waiting on that. Likely will come up in the sequel. As they're returning back to Earth, they are each sort of exposed to a different sort of physical stimuli, I want to say, is I guess the more appropriate term, but basically there is something that affects each of them as they are trying to travel back through the dimensions. Ben Grimm is basically thrown apart by rocks, Johnny is basically lit on fire, and Reed is trying to shut his capsule door, but it keeps getting pulled open, so it's stretching his limbs all over the place. And so it kind of explains how they get their powers and sort of a weird way of telling that backstory and explaining that origin, which I don't mind that necessarily. I think it's actually a very good way of telling an origin story in a different way. How Sue is involved is kind of lazy because she didn't actually go on the interdimensional travel. She was actually asleep and just happened to be in the labs. Noticed that they were using the machines and was trying to get them back. So she's at the control panel trying to work to get them back, and then in the end there's like this big shockwave that basically hits her and turns her invisible. That one I don't really understand, but... And then they get their powers. They're basically under the eye of the government for the next little bit, and they are just subjected to testing and basically coercing by the government in order to like fully understand what's going on with them. There's a specific part I really want to touch on because I found this to be... I found the moment that they got their powers the exact turning point of this movie. In the extent that after they get their powers, we no longer have any character building moments for the rest of the movie. We no longer understand their motivations. We no longer understand who they are as people. It's almost like as if the first half of the movie had never existed. And it really, really upsets me because they had such a good setup in that first half of the movie. By the way, they get their powers horrifically, might I add. Like, Johnny's body is literally a fried corpse when Reed is basically knocked unconscious, but he starts waking up first. And so he's crawling out from under the rubble of the travel because it, of course, explosions and things. So he's crawling out and one of his limbs is stretching out and it stretches out horrifically. Like, the way they put detail into this is absolutely horrifying. I know I said I wanted darker and grittier, but I didn't think they were gonna go that far. So he's crawling and one of his limbs is stretching out. He sees Johnny's fried corpse in the corner of his eye. It's literally on fire, and as far as he knows, one of his best friends that he's developed a very considerable relationship with over the last 45 minutes of the movie is dead in his mind. So then he continues crawling, and he hears Ben screaming out for help, like, please help me, and he's basically just this mountain of rock. And Reed passes out when he sees his own limbs stretching every which way, and he passes out from the shock. He escapes during a moment where no one's really watching him. So he goes through the ventilation shaft and he feels so responsible for Ben because Ben wouldn't have been in the situation had it not been for Reed, logically speaking. So Reed is trying to find Ben and he finds Ben's cell where he's being locked up. The moment when Ben just kind of turns to him and he's literally looking at him in the vents and yelling, please help me, and it looks so horrifying and terrifying and oh my god, just it would be so traumatizing to go through something like that, where you feel like you have destroyed your friends' lives because he didn't understand the full extent of what had happened to them or what is going on with them. So in his mind, he has pretty much ruined his friends' lives. And he escapes and manages to get away and then runs off for a year. After he gets out, there is a jump cut from that point to a year later, where they're shown working with the government and training and in science labs, and there's constantly being tested and being put out into the field to do field work, and it's just like, what? Why? I mean, usually when you do those giant time jumps, especially a year-long time jump, usually it's because you don't want to do a million montages of them training and finding out how to use their powers and things like that. But that's exactly what they jumped to. They jumped to them basically in a position where it's like, oh, they don't quite have full control of their powers and they're still figuring them out. Like, for example, Sue has trouble levitating, has trouble holding herself up, and can't really control both her invisibility and her levitation abilities. And yet then in the climax of the movie, she's able to do it no problem and be able to levitate 3 other people. Like, it makes no sense in terms of the continuity of the movie. They're showing her still struggling to use her powers a year later, and then she has perfect use of them less than a day later. Then we get to the scene of Victor Von Doom. Victor Von Doom is the laziest I think I've ever seen a superhero villain shown in terms of what he now looks like, because again, we were shown a developed character at the beginning of the movie, someone who had motivation, who had an identity, who had an idea of how the world worked. And then when he comes back in the second half of the movie with his own powers and how that all works, he's literally brought back through the interdimensional travel machine because they rebuilt it throughout the year and tested it again and did it again with humans, and then they did it properly where they're like, oh, we're gonna go collect samples. They found Doom. So they bring Doom back and they're like, there's no way he should be alive. So the military guy like goes and says, I'm gonna go talk to him first. And Doom just flat out like kills him. Like he blows his head apart in the most horrifying way possible. Like, they don't censor anything. Usually some superhero movies go a little too PG with that kind of stuff. I mean, it's like, oh, if you're gonna punch people that many times or if you're gonna shoot somebody, it's not so clean. But this went to the other extreme of that. This went way to the other end where it's just like, that was like an R-rated horror film where someone's head explodes, kind of horrific. And he does this as he's walking through the halls of the lab. Person's head, blood splatter on the wall. It's like someone just had their head blown off by a shotgun. That's the kind of imagery that they're evoking. They find Reed, they bring him back to the lab, and he's wearing this suit that kind of controls him so that he can maintain a normal form. He can still use his powers, but it's mainly just so that his body doesn't like fall apart like jelly. There's this moment between him and Ben because they send Ben to go get Reed. And it's the most heartbreaking moment of the movie because there's a legitimate tension that Ben feels like Reed not only caused what happened to him, but also left him behind. Because Reed has been gone for a year and he's just been trying to figure out how to reverse what happened to them, and it's not like he ran away and had no intention of coming back. It was that he ran away and was genuinely trying to work on things, but he basically cloaked himself completely from the government. And as far as his friends knew, he had abandoned them. So when Ben finds him and they have this moment of like, look at what you did to me kind of thing, that you would normally expect with the Fantastic Four because that's a huge part of the story. I mean, I understand there's this, that Reed is like, I want to fix this. I didn't abandon you. I didn't do this I didn't do this to you on purpose. And Reed is like, we used to be such good friends. Ben just turns to him and says, friends? We are not friends. And it's just so heartbreaking because you know what has happened earlier in the movie and you know the extent of their history, and to hear them say that, that's genuinely heartbreaking. The thing that upsets me about that is that they completely throw that moment away later in the movie. In the climax of the movie, which is basically right after they find Von Doom and he becomes, you know, Dr. Doom. By the way, his design is absolutely terrible. Like, I'll put a picture here of his design and he looks unless he has the hood over his head, he looks nothing like Dr. Doom. The design on his face looks absolutely ridiculous in my opinion. The climax of the movie is basically the most generic superhero climax that you can think of, and it happens in less than 10 minutes. So Von Doom travels back to the other dimension, he creates this wormhole that is now destroying Earth, and the Fantastic Four go through the portal and they just, you know, fight Von Doom and they beat him together as a team and they fight together and they're like, hey, we have to do it as teamwork because there's no other way to beat him. It was like the Avengers climax without the aliens and cut down to about 10 minutes instead of the half-hour epic extravaganza that we had that actually was really cool and fun to watch. The reason I brought up the powers thing earlier and how they were basically showing that they were completely incompetent with their powers even a year after what happened is because in the climax you have moments where like Sue is able to levitate the Thing and Mr. Fantastic and have no struggle with it whatsoever, even though literally hours before that she was still struggling to hold herself up. And then there's also the moment with Reed and his suit, because again, Reed can't really hold his own form without the suit on. Like, he can still use his powers, but it basically maintains his body form. There's a moment where Von Doom takes apart the suit that he's wearing, like he just kind of tears off the metal that's around him and it just, you know, he turns into jelly. He's having this moment of like, oh, I can't do it, I can't move, I can't do this, I can't do that. And then it's the most cliched thing when you see, you know, the Thing gets punched and Johnny gets tossed across the landscape and Sue is under Von Doom's foot kind of thing, and Reed is just like, I can do it! And then, you know, he stands up like as if nothing had happened and he just continues fighting Doom. It's moments like that that really frustrate me. I really hate it when you have moments where it's like, up until this point, this character was unable to do something, and then just through willpower and seeing your friends hurt, and the moment you really need to use those powers, suddenly you're able to control them without issue whatsoever. I fucking hate that. It is my biggest pet peeve in any movie, especially if you're doing a superhero movie, about their origins, that you don't see that growth, that you don't see it where it's like, no, maybe they fought them earlier on and they were not prepared enough to fight them, which is what we had in movies like the Avengers. They were not prepared to take on Loki or Ultron earlier on, but then as they go through the rest of the movie, they realize what they need to do in order to make sure that they are ready to fight and that they are good to go. So then basically, as soon as the climax ends, they immediately cut to talking to the government, and the government saying like, so you guys basically want your own lab and all this kinds of stuff and government protection, what if we say no? And then you just see Ben going like, and then cut to that, and then they get their own laboratory. They have this, you know, really cheesy conversation of like, oh, we're a team now, we need to call ourselves something. And then Ben just makes an offhand comment about something being fantastic, and so Reed's like, oh, that's what it is, we're the... And then it cuts to Fantastic Four in the credits. The main reason I hate this movie so much, and why I vehemently despise it, is because the first half was so good. I hate it when a movie is absolutely brilliant for the first half and is doing all the right things and is moving in a way that you would expect and just be like, wow, this is really entertaining and I really like these characters and I like the story so far. I love the atmosphere, I love the cinematography, I like the way that they get their powers. And then as soon as they get their powers, they go through the cliche machine of every generic superhero movie that you can think of, and it turns into a pile of ridiculousness, especially considering they're going with such a sense of realism up until that point. It turns into such a cheese fest sort of wink and nod thing at the end that's sort of like, oh, we know what you're expecting. I could not have been more frustrated with the Fantastic Four movie, as me and my friend basically called it. It is a blue balls of a movie. We're still waiting for a climax to that movie. There's no real definitive ending. You don't feel like you got a good conclusion to that story. You kind of feel like you got gypped. Like you got really gypped out of a good story. You do hear all these stories about how the director put out on Twitter how the executives really kind of got in the way of the final product. They ordered a bunch of reshoots, the script was completely taken apart and big scenes were completely changed and taken out of the movie. The second half was completely reshot and it was completely redone to make it more palatable and more generic for a mainstream audience, and all it ended up doing was giving us something that we got, you know, 10 plus years ago. That's not what we wanted. We wanted them to continue on the train that they were going with the first half of the movie. If they had maintained what they had with the first half, I would have been a much happier viewer of the movie. I may not have loved the movie. I don't know if I would have gone that far, but I think if the movie continued on the path that it was going on originally, it would have been a far better product than what we ended up getting. So I honestly can't recommend the movie. I recommend it to the extent of, if you're a Marvel fanatic like I am, you'll see it regardless. I saw it on opening weekend. Didn't go so far as to see it opening night because I had already started hearing the reviews were really bad. It was a 7% on Rotten Tomatoes when we saw it, and then a couple days later it was 9%. Either way, it's still bad. It's not entertaining, it's not fun to watch. You will feel so disheartened by the end of the movie, and you will feel so let down by the end of the movie. And for the first half, you will wonder, what is everyone talking about? This movie actually looks really good from the first half. And then once they get their superpowers, that's the moment that you should expect the movie to start going downhill. There's nothing you can expect after that moment that is a positive for the movie. So that is my Fantastic Four review. That is my first movie review in almost a year. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I feel so exhausted talking about this movie because I just get so frustrated with it, and it makes my blood boil because we've had so many good superhero movies now, and we're in an era of really good quality superhero movies that I just expected so much better, especially from 20th Century Fox, who has also been producing the X-Men movies and is producing the Deadpool movies. I still really look forward to Deadpool, and I'm really excited for X-Men Apocalypse. But that's mainly because in terms of the X-Men franchise, it's been more largely hits than misses, though it does have its misses. Let's not forget. So that's it for me and my Fantastic Four review. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what you liked or didn't like about this video in the comments below. Also, please give my channel a subscribe if you want to see some more of these videos. It would be a really big help and I would really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good rest of your day. See ya. Also, no end credit scene? Are you fucking kidding me?